So, the M4 iPad Pro, everybody. Let's talk about this thing. So before we jump into the actual review and talk about real-world use cases and how the M4 iPad Pro has improved over last year's iteration, I briefly want to touch on the spec list so you guys have an understanding and a baseline of what Apple improved and changed from a design standpoint on the iPad Pro. So the big headliner was two main things. It was a new change in design from a slimness standpoint. So you're now dealing with a 5.1mm 13-inch iPad Pro and a 5.4mm thick 11-inch iPad Pro, which, again, when you first grab it, especially if you've had a 2018 to a 2023 iPad Pro, this thing is extremely thin, almost to the point where you feel like you can just bend it, but it still gives you a sense of confidence with the build materials that it's not just going to bend while being put in a bag or something like that. So as long as you take care of your tech for the most part, which, I tend to do, I don't really baby it, but I don't really throw it around either, you should be fine from a flexibility standpoint. I don't think it's going to flex on many people, if at all. But the thinness does make it extremely lightweight, especially compared to last year's model. And then the second thing that they updated was going from that mini LED to now OLED. Now, basically what they did was they added a tandem OLED technology, which is the first time Apple's claiming this has been done. And what that allows it to do is to increase the overall brightness, because yes, OLED has the richest blacks and the best contrast ratios, and it's probably the crispiest and clearest type of, screen tech that we have out there, but there is a detriment to the brightness levels for OLED. So what they did is they stacked two on top of each other to then give us 1000 nit brightness for kind of standard definition content for everyday use, and then 1600 nits of brightness for HDR or high dynamic range content consumption, which does actually translate well, especially because this is a mobile first device, being a tablet and all that. So being able to use this outside in direct sunlight, it's starting to become summertime here, so the days are getting longer, and being able to use it in direct sunlight is a nice little addition, even though now we do have OLED, which is a beautiful display. Some of the quick things that they changed with the design is they actually removed the second rear camera, so the ultra-wide is no longer there. They didn't really talk about why they removed it or anything like that. They just removed it. Then they talked about the two-tone flash. That's going to be better for document scanning and things like that. So I don't know a lot of people that are going to be upset by the removal of it, but the fact that Apple didn't mention it or kind of is just admitting that it was a useless piece of tech on the actual iPad itself is kind of funny nonetheless. And then another thing that they did is they moved, finally, the selfie camera or the FaceID camera from that portrait orientation over to the landscape orientation. But I hate to break it to people, if you really look at it, it's actually off-centered, which is kind of annoying and my OCD really kicks in. Now, it's definitely awesome that it's finally in the correct orientation for video calls and things like that. But the fact that it's off-center sometimes throws me off a little bit. And the reason I think they had to do that is because Apple preferred to have the charging tech for the Apple Pencil and the magnets be perfectly lined up and have the Apple Pencil be symmetrical on the iPad versus the selfie camera itself. And I think that kind of got in the way, so they picked the lesser of two evils. I'd rather, I guess, have the selfie camera be off-centered than the entire Apple Pencil be off-centered on the iPad Pro. But what does this thinness and this new lightweight nature of the iPad Pro really give you in terms of use cases? And the number one thing that I've noticed, and to give you guys an idea, I'm rocking with the 1TB 13-inch iPad Pro with no cellular, so it's Wi-Fi only, and I say with the glossy display, which we'll touch on the texture display in a little bit. But the number one thing that you notice with the lightweight nature of the iPad Pro is that you want to use it in tablet mode a little bit more often. One of the things that I kind of tended to do with my 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro is I never ever use it in tablet mode. If I wanted to use an iPad in tablet mode, I would grab my wife's 11-inch tablet, or when we had an iPad mini, I would use an iPad mini, but I would never actually use my 12.9-inch iPad Pro without the Magic Keyboard, unless it was kind of face down on a desk itself. I would never just kind of grab it, lean back on a couch, watch content, or read an article, or maybe take notes down. I would always be doing that on a desk, versus now, on the 13-inch iPad Pro with a 5.1mm thickness, it's a different game, right? It's a different ball game altogether. Yes, they reduced the weight by, I believe, 30% or 20%. And even though it's not a lot in terms of the percentage-wise, it does make a big difference because not only is it lighter, but the thin factor even makes it easier to hold for long periods of time. So that is kind of the best representation of what that new thinness and lightweight nature is going to do to your iPad Pro. It's going to make you want to use it in tablet mode how it was intended to be used back in 2011 when Steve Jobs initially released the iPad itself. So that is what I noticed from a tangible difference. And then when combined with the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil, it's just an overall slimmer, more lightweight, and more portable package. Now, if I had an older iPad Pro like the M1, the M2, even the 2018 iPad Pro, I mean, it's not like that thing was super heavy to begin with, but the fact that it is lighter is a welcome addition to the iPad Pro lineup. But before we continue talking, a quick word from our sponsor, Paperlike. Paperlike was one of the first iPad accessories that I'd ever tried. The moment that I got my 2018 iPad Pro, I knew I'd have to get the screen protector, and it never disappointed. So now, 5 years later, Paperlike has just released their new version 2.1, or their Swiss Paperlike. Paperlike's proprietary nanodots are tiny microbeads that add resistance and improve haptic feedback when using the Apple Pencil on your iPad, mimicking the feel of writing on paper. The new Nanotextured display on the 2024 iPad Pros does reduce glare but doesn't actually enhance the haptic feedback for the Apple Pencil, so for a Paperlike feel and better Apple Pencil experience, Paperlike is still the best choice. But they recently decided to bring their iPad accessory expertise and create a new premium folio case for the iPad Pro and iPad Air. Their new charcoal folio case aims to bring users the look and feel of your favorite notebook, but for your iPad. My favorite part is how it actually connects via magnets instead of having a shell or a case to mount it. All you do is slap your iPad on the magnets to hold it sturdily in place. As you can see, my scientific shake test lets you know just how strong those magnets are. If you're looking for a tri-fold folio case that protects your iPad, can act as a stand and a canvas, is premium and lightweight, you definitely got to give this one a try. Click the first link in the description below to check it out. It really helps support the 9to5Mac channel. So thank you to Paperlike for partnering up with 9to5Mac. And now, back to the video. And then aside from the actual design, and then of course the OLED, the big headliner internally is that Apple debuted their M4 chip in the M4 iPad Pro. And now what exactly does this mean to most people? Because since Apple released the M1 and we went from Intel to the M-based machines, we did see a big jump in performance, right? It was night and day. They kind of broke Moore's law, which everything doubles in speed every year and things like that. So when Apple did that big change, it was mind-blowing, right? We were able to use things like an $800 MacBook Air to run entire 4K studios and things of that nature. But now, with each iteration, the actual increase in performance isn't as great, and we're never really going to see that jump from Intel to M that we saw previously back in 2020. So the M4 iPad Pro, yes, they compared it to the M2 iPad Pro and the speeds that it kind of increased, and you get, 10 CPU cores, 10 GPU cores, you have 4 performance cores, 6 efficiency cores, you have up to 16 gigs of RAM if you spec it out correctly and you go with over 1 terabyte of storage. But at the end of the day, the M4 iPad Pro is still going to be plenty powerful to what it was doing with the M2, the M1, and even like the A12Z and A12X chips, which were essentially M-series chips just wrapped up in a different naming moniker. So that's what that M4 gives you. It gives you raw performance at the app level, and you can see that it flies through pretty much anything that you throw at it. I did some test exports. It exports extremely fast with 4K footage. From rendering thumbnails in Affinity Photo, it exports that very easily. You can import data very quickly, and everything is just going to be that much more efficient. I was personally coming from the M1 iPad Pro, the baseline version, so I only had 8 gigs of RAM, versus now I have the M4 iPad Pro with 1 terabyte of storage and 16 gigs of RAM. So for me, the actual performance gains are relatively substantial, for the most part. Right? I'm not going from exporting something in 10 minutes down to 1 minute, but you do see a good amount of increase in terms of actual performance and render speeds when you are doing some creative tasks, right? So that is where you start to see what the M4 chip can do for you compared to what we had last year with the M2 and then the M1 previously. But then you probably are going to ask, Fernando, what if I'm not in this creative world? What if I'm not creating video? What if I'm not coding? What if I'm not creating games? Like, am I going to see these performance gains and these efficiencies, right? And I'm going to say, if you're comparing it to the M1 iPad Pro and the M2, you're really not going to see a big jump in performance, right? You're going to see maybe some small things happen here and there. Maybe you'll be able to kind of hold in terms of RAM storage. You'll be able to hold a few more apps open without it closing out on you, without it having to restart. But for the most part, it's still going to be very snappy. There was nothing wrong with my M1 iPad Pro. There's nothing wrong with the M2 iPad Pro. If you're running something like an Office suite, right? If you're using Excel and PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, it's going to fly through those applications and be able to use them very, very easily, especially with the new Magic Keyboard. It's a wonderful experience. If you're just viewing content, it's going to be able to view content wonderfully, right? The OLED panel is going to help out from making it a clear viewing experience, but from a speed and like 4K standpoint, it's going to be relatively the same. Some other cool use cases that I noticed that, you probably want to compare it to is gaming. How is gaming on the iPad Pro? If you have to push it to those AAA games and things like that, then yes, you're going to get, ray tracing, which is something that's exclusive to the M4 iPad Pro. But the fluidity and the frames per second and the lagginess, if any, there isn't really any on either the M1, M2, or the M4 iPad Pro. So you're getting a little bit more if you're really pushing it towards the end of there, like you're not going to get any drop frames and things like that. But if you're casually just gaming with some Apple Arcade games, or you just have your favorite, Retro Bowl game, or maybe you're using the new Delta emulator, everything's going to run extremely smoothly. You can still connect your Xbox controller, your PlayStation controller. So you really got to sit back and ask yourself if you need that extra kind of oomph. Do you need that extra 10, 15, maybe even 20% compared to whatever iPad you had previously to really get you and make you a little bit more efficient? Because the M4 iPad Pro is going to be more efficient from point A to point B compared to the older ones, but again, that's expected because it is a 2-year upgrade, which we were expecting to have, so we are expecting efficiency gains and performance gains. Some other use cases that you might get some benefit from having the M4 is with Stage Manager. So if you are using your M4 iPad Pro as your main computer, like I tend to do for the most part, Stage Manager has come a long way since iPadOS 16 and when it was initially released, and random management is much better, the fluidity of the applications are much better. The M2 and the M1 iPad Pro did get updates along the way to make it more fluid with those physical hardware specs, but the M4 iPad Pro does make it a little bit better because you are able to then manage, 4 applications at once in one viewing and then have another 4 applications in another side view with the iPad Pro. You're able to then have different viewings of Stage Manager on your iPad versus an external monitor, which was all capable on the M1 and M2 iPad Pro. It's just a little bit more fluid, it's a little bit easier to use in terms of how quickly and how snappy everything seems on the M4 iPad Pro. Again, you really got to hold these things side by side to really test them out and really push them to see if you are getting gains. And you do definitely get some gains on the M4 iPad Pro. But if I handed you an M1 iPad Pro today and that's all you knew and that's all you had, you would still be very happy with the outcome of the M1 iPad Pro altogether because it was already an overpowered machine for a tablet to begin with. And some of the other things that we've grown to love with the iPad Pro, for instance, the quad speakers are still amazing. I thought the speakers would actually take a hit from a sound quality standpoint because there was less actual area inside of the iPad itself since it's thinner, but the bass is still bassy, it's still plenty loud, it's still very crisp, it doesn't distort at those high levels. So if you are using your iPad Pro out loud to listen to music or even take a FaceTime call or listen to a podcast, you'll be more than happy than what the speakers have to offer. Some other tidbits that Apple improved on the M4 iPad Pro without actually mentioning it to us was the fact that it now charges relatively faster. So they do say that you can now use a faster wattage brick. They're very vague with how fast it actually charges. I've heard reports of 40, 45, and up to 60, but it does charge faster and it does hold a charge for longer than the previous models did. I believe the previous models fast charge topped out at 33 watts. The iPad Pro, the M4 one, is at a minimum of 40 watts, and like I said, people have said they can get it up to 60 watts depending on what situations you're in, so that is a nice little addition. And then Apple did give us a new option with the Nanotextured Glass option. So the Nanotextured Glass is a very interesting situation, and I think Apple priced it this way on purpose. So it is a $100 upgrade, but the only way to upgrade it is if you go with at least a 1TB version. And I believe the reason why they went with the 1TB version and they didn't offer this at the baseline model is because they don't want just the average person to go in, look at the baseline model of the iPad Pro, say that they like the nanotexture display, and then buy it at that price point, because they think that the nanotexture display is for the person that knows how to use it, knows the benefits of it, and knows how to actually take care of it. Because from what I've heard, the Pro Display XDR, their nanotexture display, is a very fragile situation. You got to be very careful with it. It nicks easily. You got to use the correct microfiber cloth to clean it. So I believe the nanotexture display, even though it's a little bit more rugged because you are using an Apple Pencil with it, it still has that same idea, right? You still don't want to just give it to somebody that isn't aware of what exactly it is. And I think Apple priced it at that price point, so you need to spend a minimum of $2,000 in order to get the nanotexture display. And then finally, I do want to briefly touch on the accessories because Apple did finally give us a new updated Magic Keyboard, and they gave us a brand new Apple Pencil Pro. So quickly with the Magic Keyboard, the design is relatively the same, the footprint is pretty much identical. What they changed was some of the material choices, and they did add a couple things. So the first thing that you notice is that the actual place where the keyboard and the trackpad sit is made out of aluminum, which does mimic what the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro have. So it does make you feel like you're using more of a laptop solution, or at least it feels way more familiar if you're coming from a MacBook Air, because it does have that same exact aluminum. And then they also added a function row of keys, which is a nice little add-on. Again, not something that I was dying for, but people seem to be annoyed that it was omitted in the last Magic Keyboard. So that is something that is now available and included with the Magic Keyboard. And then they also made the trackpad larger on the new Magic Keyboard. Now, the way that I personally use the trackpad with the iPad Pro is kind of like an extension of the screen, so it's mostly for gesture-based controls to begin with. So even though the trackpad was relatively tiny on the old Magic Keyboard, I didn't really kind of think too much about it because I was rarely using it for a point-and-click solution. It was more so for me to use like 2-finger or 3 or 4-finger gestures, and then when I wanted to point and click, I would actually use my finger or my Apple Pencil to do so because, again, it is a touchscreen. But I do welcome the new Magic Keyboard. I'm a fan of it. I obviously got it, $350. But one thing is the cross-compatibility. The new Magic Keyboard only works with the M4 iPad Pro. You cannot use an old Magic Keyboard with the new M4 iPad Pro, or vice versa. You can't use a new Magic Keyboard for an older iPad Pro. That's just Apple doing Apple things, so you're still going to have to spend an additional $350 if you want to get a Magic Keyboard. And then the final thing about the Magic Keyboard is that it does have the iPad sit a little bit further back, probably to make room for the actual function row of keys, and then it also gives you a little bit more in terms of viewing angles because you can push it back just that much more. And then in my opinion, the biggest update has to be the Apple Pencil Pro. Now the Apple Pencil Pro, at first glance is identical. The only way that you can tell the difference between an Apple Pencil 2 and an Apple Pencil Pro is it says Apple Pencil Pro in a lighter gray font. Otherwise, it's the same exact color, it's the same exact size, the same exact weight, so you can't really tell them apart unless you see the little Pro moniker on the Apple Pencil itself. But they did add a good amount of function to this, and they kept the price at $130. So the first thing they added was Find My support, so you're able to add your Apple Pencil to your iPad Pro for Find My, so if you do lose it, which I've lost 2 or 3 Apple Pencils in the last probably 5 years, so that's a great little addition, which I thought was coming sooner rather than later, but it's finally here. The second thing that they added is they added a gyroscope in there. So the gyroscope allows you to kind of tilt the actual pen itself or the pencil so the tips of whatever tool you're using virtually also change alongside that. So for instance, if you're using a highlighter, that highlighter tip isn't symmetrical all the way around. It does have some other sides and some other lengths to give you the different kind of form factor that you would want when you are drawing or designing or whatever the case may be, and the gyroscope does allow for that. And there's a cool little Easter egg in there, if you guys haven't seen it yet, I've seen it all over Twitter, that if you hover the actual pencil itself over, let's say, the Apple Notes application, there is a fake virtual shadow, which isn't a real shadow. It is a fake virtual shadow that's being cast onto the Notes app based on whatever tool you're using, and it focuses and uses the gyroscope. So not only does it show the shadow, but also when you rotate it and you can see the tip kind of moving as well. Again, zero function needed for that, but again, it just shows you how tight and how kind of well-made everything Apple does is. And then my favorite new feature of the Apple Pencil Pro has to be the new squeeze functionality. So the squeeze functionality it's just a new way to interact with the actual Apple Pencil itself. It's still held on to the double tap feature, so it's not like you're losing that feature, but the squeeze function allows you to then have additional shortcuts. By default, if you're in the Notes app itself, it'll bring up the actual tool pad, so you can choose your color, choose your pen tip. It's a nice little addition, and combined with the hover feature that we get with the M2 iPad Pro and newer, I like the actual functionality of the new Apple Pencil Pro. And one of the best features about this is that the squeeze function can actually be mapped to a shortcut. So you can open up any application whenever you just squeeze your Apple Pencil if you're on your home screen. The next iteration I think Apple should do is give us kind of variations of the squeeze, so like single squeeze, double squeeze, maybe long squeeze to give us even more shortcut ability. But overall, I'm very happy with the Apple Pencil Pro, and if I were to recommend one of the products, if you do have the supported iPad, Apple Pencil Pro is the one that I would recommend to most people. And again, if you have an Apple Pencil 2, it does not work with your new M4 iPad Pro. Only the USB-C Apple Pencil and then the new Apple Pencil Pro work with the new iPad Pro. So to close out my, review, I'm going to call this maybe a first impressions or my first initial thoughts after a week of having the M4 iPad Pro. I will definitely touch on this maybe 2-3 months down the line because this M4 iPad Pro is going to be my computer. It is my computer. I've been an iPad enthusiast since 2018 because I've loved the form factor ever since then and how it's just evolved over time. You know, if you told me iPadOS 13 would evolve into what we have today, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But again, people still want more. If you're somebody that wants macOS on the iPad Pro, like I get that, but I just don't think that's ever going to happen, right? They're two different operating systems, they're two different use cases, they're two different demographics. Apple doesn't want to replace macOS with the iPad Pro. They're not trying to have people buy iPad Pros over MacBook Airs. It's for two different niches and two different demographics. Now, it's up to you to decide which one you want to go with because you can definitely get most tasks done that you could on macOS. On iPadOS, it's just a different way that you get it done, right? There's different applications, different use cases. Getting from point A to point B can happen, and it's just how you kind of get there versus on macOS. So, if you're somebody that wants macOS on the iPad Pro, just go get a laptop. That's what you're gonna have to go do. Go get a MacBook Pro, go get a MacBook Air, and you'll be happy with that. And then if you want to get a cheaper iPad Pro on the side or a used or refurbished one, if you just want an iPad Pro to throw around or maybe use with Sidecar and things of that nature. But if you're like me, you're an iPad enthusiast, you're a designer, you want to use iPadOS, you want to get access to the whole App Store and have dedicated apps or millions of dedicated apps, then the iPad Pro is for you. But who should upgrade to this M4 iPad Pro? In my opinion, the upgrade that I made from the M1 baseline iPad Pro to the 1TB M4 iPad Pro, that to me was a substantial enough upgrade, but I knew that I was going to do that. If I just went baseline to baseline, it might not have been worth it because yes, the thinness and the design factor is cool, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really add too much function. Yes, it makes it more tabletable, if that's even a word, because it is thinner and lighter, especially at the larger 13-inch size, but I don't really think the actual experience and the function is going to be good enough or more intense enough, or I guess the performance gains aren't going to be high enough for you to warrant spending $1,300 at a minimum on a new iPad Pro. But again, to each their own, you know who you are if you want to upgrade to the M4 iPad Pro. If you have an older iPad Pro, like a 2018, 2020 with the A12Z and things like that, then yeah, jump on it. I think it's a worthy upgrade. It's going to be faster. Performance gains are going to be great. But at the end of the day, it's still iPadOS, and I'm not saying that in a bad thing. iPadOS is very familiar. iPadOS is still going to run the same as it would on the new M4 iPad Pro, as it does on the 10th gen iPad, as it does on the 2018 iPad Pro. So the experience is going to be very familiar. It's going to be like upgrading from a 13 Pro Max to a 15 Pro Max on the iPhone. You get some cool new design quirks, and it is a little bit faster and a little bit better. But at the end of the day, it's still iOS, and iOS is pretty much the same across the entire board, minus a couple of, exclusive features here and there. So I'm going to continue to put it through its paces because, again, I love the iPad Pro. I love the ecosystem. I love all the apps that it has. It's my favorite kind of computer to use of all time. So I'm definitely going to continue to put it through its paces and then give you guys maybe another review 3 months down the line to let you guys know if this thing is actually worth all the hype or not. But for now, that is just my 2 cents. Let me know with a comment down below. What do you think? Did you guys upgrade to the M4 iPad Pro? What did you upgrade from? Did you go from the M2 to the M4? Was that enough of an upgrade for you to warrant that $1,300+ price point? Always curious to know what you guys are doing with your iPad Pros. But I know this was a long one. If you made it to the end, leave a dolphin in the comments down below so I know that you made it to the end. And if you guys want to watch more videos like this one, click on one of these right here. And again, big shout out to Paperlike for sponsoring this video and partnering up with 9to5Mac. Definitely save your money on the Nanotextured display and just get yourself a Paperlike for $40, and it comes with 2 of them. But that's going to do it, everybody. Until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace.